Happy Wednesday. Well, I don't know. So for some, it's a happy Wednesday. For some, we're all in our feelings. But wherever you are today, good evening. I'm your host, Shamika Rhymes, and this is Soulibration. I tried to wear a T-shirt that says Soulibration, so we're gonna still feed our souls tonight. So let me know in the comments where you're watching from and how you're doing this evening. I see Gerard is already in the comments. Hi, Gerard. Remember to share this with your network. And again, if you have any questions during the show, drop it in the chat. So November is National Family Caregivers Month. And so tonight we're going to care for the caregivers because caregivers are always going above and beyond for their loved ones. And so I wanted to make sure that the caregivers are being loved on and taking care of themselves. So tonight we're going to talk about the realities of caregiver burnout. And I have an expert guest joining me tonight, Dr. Shay Alexander Thomas, a licensed marriage and family therapist. And we're going to talk about ways of recognizing the signs of burnout, strategies for managing stress, and practical ways to build a sustainable caregiving routine that includes self care. I want y'all to understand you have to take care of yourself as well. And boundary setting. You know, I love boundary setting. So, whether you're a caregiver yourself or supporting someone who is, share this with your network. And, we're going to also offer you some guidance on how to maintain your mental health while navigating the challenging yet rewarding role of being a caregiver. So, again, let me know where you're watching from. I see Arizona. Hi, Shelly. Hi, Tamika from New Orleans. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest. Dr. Shay Thomas, again, she's a licensed marriage and family therapist, consultant, and owner of Dr. Shay Speaks LLC, and she specializes in emotional intimacy, health communication, grief, adjustment to injury and illness, caregiver support, and many, many more things. So let's welcome Dr. Shay. Hi, Dr. Shay.
Hello, hello. Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being able to do this. Welcome to Soulibration. We've already got the chat popping. Hello, Linda Young from Gastonia. That's my mother.
So sweet.
So, Dr. Shay, I was just letting everybody know that this month is National Family Caregivers Month. And I think it's super important that we shine a light on those that are caregivers and how to protect their mental health, self care, and hopefully give them some tips to keep them from burnout. So, can you explain? Because those tuning in they may have heard the term caregiver thrown around, but may not be exactly sure on what it is and what caregiver burnout is. So, can you kind of give an overview of both things?
Yes, absolutely. So being a caregiver can involve a number of things. Traditionally, we think about it like taking care of an older, an elder parent, but it can encompass a lot of different things. It can encompass caring for a sibling, caring for a child with special needs. These days, just being a parent, I think the Surgeon General just put out some new research on how parenting is now also a public health issue, right up there with loneliness. And
Mhm.
so being a caregiver basically means you are splitting your time between not only doing what you need to do for yourself, but also literally either physically, emotionally, medically, logistically taking care of someone else who is unable to fully or completely do certain things for themselves.
Okay. So, what does caregiver burnout look like versus just regular old plain stress? How does it differ? And what are some early signs that caregivers can kind of look out for to think, okay, I might be burnt out versus just stressed?
Yeah, I like to think about it like a car,
Mhm.
and many people ignore those signals on the car. Whether you have a fancy modern, electric car and you've got the computer, symbols all over the place, or you have other ways that you think about what's lacking. So whether that check oil light comes on, whether the maintenance comes on, whether your gas tank is on E. And so in life that is what happens. Holistic wellness and well-being involves a number of things from eating to so nutrition is a part of that, sleep is a part of that, making time for yourself just to breathe, go to the bathroom. You'd be surprised how many people hold it at work and
Wow.
and not. And so when you find yourself consistently, repeatedly neglecting what needs to be done for you to function
Mhm.
in the same way that we, again, if we ignore that gas light or that check oil light or that transmission symbol on the car for long enough, what's going to happen? We're going to be on the side of the road somewhere, or something's going to cost a lot of money and time and could have been preventable.
Thank you for that. And I'm reminding everyone in the chat, if you have questions, make sure you drop it in there because we're going to answer them throughout the show. What are some common reasons that caregivers do experience burnout, and why does it go unrecognized? Because you just mentioned, and as you were saying that about the car, I'm like, I do have a light on my car.
Mhm.
I'm ignoring it.
Yeah, yeah. And we all do it, right? We
Mhm.
all, we live in a society that kind of gives you a badge of honor for multitasking. And
Yeah.
so it kind of comes with the territory, the age that we live in, and we just really have to pay attention. It's, and I'm pausing because I can't help but just kind of honor the emotional state of what's going on today with some people. I know you mentioned it in the introduction, but even that, right? Like as a therapist, slowed down today, right?
Mhm.
I took time for myself. I did things to nurture my spirit. I talked to a few people. I turned television off, stopped
Yeah.
scrolling, did some other things. And so before we talk about kind of barriers to burnout, we need to understand the different things connected to holistic wellness. We have our
Mhm.
spiritual well being, we have our financial well being, we have our physical well being, which includes, as I mentioned before, sleep and nutrition. We have our emotional and mental, which encompasses the psychological and even our relational well being, right? And so your
Mhm.
interactions with people, contextual, your environment. And so what happens is some of the barriers, it can include things like your mindset. If
Mhm.
you, as a caregiver, say things like, well, it's not going to get done if I don't do it, or it's not going to be done right, or I have to do it now.
Mhm.
And, sometimes the reality of the situation does kick in, and there are time sensitive things that need to be done before there are additional repercussions. But so time is, mindset connected to time. If you have a lack of social support, a lack of other dependable people to rely on.
Mhm.
If another thing, going back to mindset, if you struggle asking for help or accepting help, that
Mhm.
can be something that serves as a barrier. Other people's unrealistic expectations. And you mentioned boundaries earlier. So your lack of ability to set and adhere to the
Mhm.
boundaries go along with that. And lack of resources, lack of access. There's a number of things that can lead to burnout.
Okay. I did see a question in this actually kind of goes along with that. Shelly wants to know, as a caregiver, how do you make time for yourself without the feeling guilty for doing so?
Guilt is definitely a barrier that goes along with that mindset. And I like to think about the definition of different terms that people bring up, right? The meaning is important. So,
Mhm.
what meaning are you attaching to either what you feel like you should do, or
Yeah.
what other people you feel obligated to do because of other people's unrealistic expectations? So, when there's guilt, you want to ask yourself, what is guilt really about?
Mhm.
Guilty is about doing something bad or wrong. Is it wrong to
Mhm.
take a shower? Is it wrong to push that snooze button if you need a little extra sleep? Is it
Mhm.
wrong to say, you know what, I have my own doctor's appointment that I've been putting off that I need to take care of, or I have my own bills that are due and I can't help you financially? And in the caregiver space, it can even be, I don't want to speak up, right?
Mhm.
Because maybe advocacy is a barrier, and so I feel guilty because not only is this not my forte, this isn't my area of expertise, but I don't want to be rude. I don't want to
Mhm.
be out of line for asking questions. So people feel guilty about a number of things. So first you have to ask yourself, what is the meaning of guilt? And two, you have to ask yourself, what is the task at hand? And what are all the options before you decide to rule out something before it's given its due consideration?
That's that's an interesting one. I just want to build upon that because it just made me think of, so for example, your career is thriving and then there's a situation that arises where now you're put in a caregiver situation, that
Mhm.
guilt comes in because it's like, well, my career is on the upswing, but now I need to go over here and take care of this person, whether it
Mhm.
is um, an elderly relative or, whatever it is. Um, how do you handle that? Kind of the same way? Is that what you would
Yeah, of
say?
course, being a family therapist, I'm all about setting the atmosphere where you can have an open and honest conversation. And that starts with yourself,
Yeah.
right? It's hard to have open conversations with family members and loved ones if we're not keeping it real with ourselves. And
True.
so you can honor that that is realistically what's going on with you mentally and emotionally. You're not, again, to bring up the guilty word again, there's nothing wrong with feeling torn about a decision because there's a lot of different things connected to it. And
Hmm.
so it's a family conversation in the same way, like creating a will or an advance directive is your decision, but you have a conversation with
Right.
family. Talking about your preferences for end of life is you have to do some self reflection, but you also share that information with other people. Choosing a physician, choosing a care plan. In our society, also in our community, there's also some shame around exploring other options, right? Like
Yeah.
long term health facilities or home health aides or palliative care when it gets to that point. And so
Hmm.
we have to lay all the options out on the table and literally go through like a decision making journey based on our values and our preferences and kind of figuring out what the wise choice is, all things considered.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, wait, one more question popped up. Now, if the person, Tamika Smith says, if the person being cared for is able to, how could they show appreciation to their caregiver through small gestures? That's a good one.
That comes up a lot too. I have not only had a little bit of personal experience myself helping
Hmm.
to care for family members, but also obviously professionally helping people
Yeah.
in private practice. And I've also worked with or contracted with other types of facilities, rehab, inpatient and outpatient care, assisted living. And so that comes up a lot. A lot of times people want to focus on, one family member or the other. And it really depends on the situation, right? If you're talking about somebody with a brain injury or somebody with mental illness, they might not have the mental and emotional wherewithal or insight to kind of put themselves in your shoes. So that's a certain situation. If you have
Mhm.
someone with special needs to where it's impacting their cognitive and emotional skills,
Right.
I think educating yourself is important because then you learn how to give the other person grace related to that. If they are mentally and verbally and cognitively and emotionally able to express something like gratitude and appreciation, it's again about having that conversation in a downtime, not in
Mhm.
the heat of the moment,
Yeah.
but just talk as you're planning for and talking about things that need to be done, and they're laying it on the table what needs to be done for them. You can also express your feelings and emotions. A lot of times, caregivers feel as if they have to put their emotions and needs on the back burner. You can
Mhm.
also, of course, I'm an advocate for personal therapy and group therapy and support group. You can also connect with other professionals and but other caregivers as well to kind of see how they navigate that situation.
Okay. Well, how would you say that the emotional strain of caregiving contributes to burnout, especially when you are caring for family members that have like long-term illnesses? Because
Mhm.
I'm sure it does, those emotions build up over time, especially if you're burning yourself out and you're not, like you said, being real with yourself and you're
Mhm.
just kind of shoving all the emotions down. How will that strain kind of affect you, say, if this is going on for years and years and years?
You might end up needing your own caregiver just to keep it real. You might exacerbate a health issue that's gone ignored, or that you procrastinated. You might have your own ache and pain and ailment that you haven't followed up on, and now you're in a situation where you cannot you know
Yeah.
take your loved one to the doctor or care for them because you need to go yourself. And so,
Mhm.
again, going back to that car analogy or metaphor, thinking
Mhm.
about what are the warning signs, right? And even if it's the basics, right? Like I'm not going to pretend like it's easy from a time management perspective to just have this nicely laid out plan, and it's just, you just follow that and everything's going to go okay. It's also not about blaming you as the caregiver like something is bad and wrong.
Mhm.
Caregiving is difficult, and caregiving makes you kind of weigh options and learn. It forces you to learn how to prioritize. And if personality wise you struggle with that anyway, or as someone mentioned, if you don't have a lot of support,
Mhm.
or if you have a lot of other things going on, think about the sandwich generation, right?
Oh,
You're
yeah.
taking care of children, but now you have to take care of parents,
Mhm.
or sibling or another loved one. And so, again, you have to know what your resources are. You have to know what the warning signs are. And at the minimum, at a bare minimum, you don't have to figure it out by yourself.
Okay. We have another question. How should siblings address caregiving where it is fair and not just placed on one person? Because I think that could lead to some
Ooh.
burnout too.
That, unfortunately, is very common and difficult because of a number of factors.
Mhm.
So there's, like this running joke between people who are an only child versus people who have a lot of siblings. And
Mhm.
one versus the other, it doesn't mean you're going to be in a better situation, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's personality is different.
Mhm.
It takes special skills. Yes, they can be taught, but it takes special skills to be a caregiver. If you are going to be an effective caregiver, it takes compassion,
Yeah.
it takes patience. And maybe there are other siblings, but maybe the situation might not be handled as effective or appropriately as it could be, right?
Mhm.
You also want to know what people's strengths are. So maybe one sibling cannot sit for 2 hours with the loved one that needs to be watched, or to be taken to the doctor, but maybe they can contribute financially. Maybe they can order a meal or cook a meal and bring it over. And so that's
Mhm.
the other way that siblings or family members can learn how to collaborate. Maybe everyone is not physically able or
Yeah.
logistically able to be a resource, but maybe you can do it in a different way.
Okay. Thank you. Um, so let's talk a little bit about self-care.
Yeah.
Because we need to talk about self-care, especially today. But what daily practices or routines can caregivers implement to protect their mental health, to prevent burnout? Like, I did an article a few years ago for Parade Magazine about, I interviewed two caregivers, and
Mhm.
both of them had different ways that they kind of tried to cope, but they just didn't stick to those daily things. And then they ended up burning themselves out.
Mhm.
So, what are
Mhm.
some daily practices that the caregivers should implement or could implement to prevent that burnout and just it's good for their mental health?
Yeah, yeah. And again, I'm not going to pretend like it's easy and just do, steps 1 through 7 and you're good to
Yeah.
go. But I will say again, if you are a caregiver, you are probably very diligent in some shape, form, or fashion, from a
Mhm.
compassionate standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from an insight standpoint, from a planning standpoint. How about putting yourself on the schedule? If you know the prescription needs to be picked up at this time, and the insurance need to be renewed at this time, and all the lists, right, all the things that you do for other people, how about set an alarm for drink some water, right? How about
Mhm.
set an alarm for 10 minutes earlier, or a 10-minute window, right?
Mhm.
How about pack a sandwich if you know you're going to be rushing all day, or pack some snacks if you know you're going to be rushing all day and sitting in waiting rooms or whatever the case may be. And
Mhm.
so figure out what your need is. again, think about the different areas of holistic wellness. Maybe you're really good at eating well and drinking water, but you're not that great at sleep. Or maybe you're good at doing all the things, but spiritually and emotionally, you're out of whack in terms of your level of anxiety and your level of panic and your level of despair. And so,
Mhm.
what do you need to do? Mindfulness, meditation, prayer. Um, can you figure out a way to incorporate movement? Can you put your favorite song on in the car while you're driving, or an
Mhm.
inspirational podcast and turn off the news? Or, can you not, can you just sit in silence sometimes, even
Mhm.
if it's for 30 seconds and not have to be doing something? Just focus on your state of being,
Mhm.
because the better and the healthier you are, again, the more effective and fitting you'll be as a caregiver for your loved one. I use the car example. Everybody also knows the one when you get on the airplane, right?
Mhm.
Like, put the mask on yourself
Yes.
before you assist others. That is real.
Yeah.
Because if something happens to you, then what? And that's
Very
how you have to think. You have to consider yourself just as much of a priority. And you have to remember the Audre Lorde quote that self care is not selfish, it is an act of self preservation. And you're not only preserving yourself for your own well being, you're preserving yourself so that you can be effective in what you need to do for your loved one.
Oh, I love that. Um, it just made me think when you were saying make sure you pack snacks and stuff. I don't go anywhere without a snack bag. Always.
Healthy snacks. Let me add that, and I'm not talking about you, Shamika, but if you always pack like chips and candy, get you
Oh,
some
yeah.
fruit, some carrots,
Yes, good
snacks
things,
that's
good
gonna give you the good energy.
Oh my goodness. Let's see. Well, you mentioned actually it reminded me Tracy Spencer was with us last week and she was talking about caregiving for her both of her parents actually. And with her mom, she was talking about how she literally just she wasn't sleeping because she
Mhm,
was just afraid she'd miss, if her mom needed her or whatever it is. So she just
mhm,
at some point stopped sleeping. And then fast forward to well she just wasn't taking care of herself because she
mhm.
became her identity became caregiver.
Yeah.
And then she also mentioned that through that journey, even through the grief of it all, learning silence and being quiet and being still. And so
Mhm,
it sounds like you should incorporate the being silent, being still stuff kind of a little bit earlier on, and it could help with sleeping. So can you suggest any other like relaxation or stress reduction techniques, especially during a busy caregiving day that, like you said, if you're at the doctor's office, um, and I don't know if you can meditate in a busy lobby or, like, should you
mhm,
go to the car? Like, what are some ways to kind of take that beat? Like, okay, because sometimes maybe you're not in the lobby. Maybe you have to go in the room for the
mhm,
appointment. Then
mhm.
what?
Yeah, again, figuring out where the opportunity lies. Is it doing what you need to do so that you get to the appointment early and you're not rushing and you literally sit in the car before you get out and help your loved one get out of the car, right?
Mhm,
Is it when you are in the waiting room, or when they check in, if there's a nurse or if there's an aide, or if they're fine and you need to go to the restroom, if you sit in that in that restroom for a minute or two longer, right?
mhm,
Again, I also want to go back to the notion of not being too full of pride or busy or fill in the blank, whatever the reason is, to ask for help or accept help, and
mhm,
in different ways. And so you can also do things like, um, I'm thinking back to when I worked in a rehab facility, and people do all kinds of things. I mentioned the playlist in the car, kind of having something when you're having a mantra or a
mhm,
Bible verse if you're, spiritual or religious in that way, and, quoting scripture. So music is great. Prayer, meditation, and scripture is
mhm,
great. even monitoring your breath. You'd be surprised
Yeah.
how many people literally walk around so tense and holding their breath. It's natural, right? It's that fight or
Yeah.
flight response. It's that
Mhm,
physiological gut punch where I mean, some of us probably did that today, right? Like,
mhm.
just when is it okay to breathe? How do I even know what's going on with my breath? Sometimes it's figuring out something to do with your hands, because a lot of times you need to kind of get the anxiety out.
Oh, yeah.
Remember when fidget spinners were so popular with kids? That
Yeah.
was effective to a point for a reason. That's why if you go to certain hospitals or rehab facilities, they have stress balls in the waiting room, or and so something that you do, even if you come up with your own routine, where before I crank up this car, I'm going to roll my neck, I'm going to
Mhm.
roll my shoulders. I'm going to say something,
Yeah.
to feed my soul, to nourish my spirit.
Mhm.
I'm going to take a breath and then I'm going to go. Right. And the same thing if you're in the doctor's office, the waiting room, on the way home, whatever the case
Mhm.
may be.
Mhm.
So thinking about it again in the different ways. Do I need to boost up my emotional? Sometimes it can be like not calling and venting to people,
Oh, yeah.
about things. And that doesn't mean don't reach out for support, but if your way to talk about what's going on is always with the energy of venting and complaining, that too is stressing you out. And you
Mhm.
don't realize it, mind, body, and spirit. So sometimes it's talking to the person who's going to pray with you, or talking to the person who's going to make you laugh, right? Or
Yeah.
listening to something that's going to
Mhm.
make you laugh. I posted something on Instagram yesterday, kind of telling people, don't be watching the news or scrolling all day, try these
Yeah.
things. And it was like, yeah, watch a comedy, play a
Mhm.
board game, sit in silence. We as a society don't know how to sit in silence, and we underestimate what it does for
Mhm.
us in terms of rejuvenation.
Yes, I sat in silence on Sunday. I
Okay.
was like, "Let me just turn," because well, part of it was I was at a cheer competition all day Saturday, so I needed the silence, so but it helped me get back on track because it was just quiet, no TV, no nothing, just me in here breathing.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
quiet.
Yeah. A couple of other things I just thought of that have become popular over the past, maybe, or probably since the pandemic. Crossword puzzles, those color by number,
Oh, yeah.
different things to kind of take your mind,
Mhm.
elsewhere in a nurturing and
Yeah.
way, not in a, again, scrolling on the phone or watching the news or complaining to somebody.
So in that vein of, say you're caretaking or caregiving someone that has a terminal illness,
Hmm.
and you without knowing, I think, and I didn't even know this was a thing but until I went through it, but just that, um what did they call it, anticipatory grief, because you're
Yes.
anticipating that
Hmm.
eventually it's going to happen.
Hmm.
How do you, like, I didn't know what to do with it. I was just like, what, and so I was taught some mindfulness things to do. But for those that may not know what they are experiencing, can you kind of tell, like, explain what it is? Because I can't put it into words. Explain what that is and what they
Yeah,
can
just
do
in
for some
layman's
kind of
terms.
self-care.
Yeah, in layman's terms, it is just the dread,
Hmm.
the absolute fear, the despair that you feel, the struggling with the uncertainty, the worrying about the future, the when and where and how and how can I stop it and what can I do? And with any form of anxiety, the foundational strategy is to focus on the present moment, right?
Hmm.
A lot of times, anxiety is either about trauma from the past or anxiety, fears of the unknown future. And
Yeah.
so that's what mindfulness is. In this present moment, my loved one is alive, and I'm going to cherish that. I'm going to honor my fear.
Hmm.
I'm going to honor my anger if I have that. I'm going to honor my grief. And I'm going to eat breakfast. I'm going to give them a hug.
Hmm.
I'm going to call my girlfriend because she done called me 15 times and I'm ignoring the phone, and I'm going to tell her I don't feel like talking, but I'm
Yeah.
okay. Like, whatever you
Yeah.
need to do But yes, that anticipatory grief is real.
Hmm.
And it is, again, it's loss of control. And that's
Yeah.
what it is too. It's accepting that
Hmm.
there's very little that we're in control in. And so what can we do about the things that we do have some say so over?
Okay.
I can choose to take a breath. I can
Mm.
choose to eat healthy. I can choose to lay down even if I don't fall asleep. I can
Hmm.
choose to stay away from things and people and situations that stress me out to the best that I can. And I will choose to
Yeah.
select something that feeds my soul.
I just love that because you're just all about the celebration by saying that.
Oh, that's right. And I can give myself permission to laugh. I
Mhm.
remember it's a phenomenon too that, like, I should not be laughing
Mm.
or
Mhm.
enjoying food or having fun when my loved one is suffering. That goes back to that mindset example.
Mhm.
And, historically, I've worked with people who their loved one is on a feeding tube, right? Their loved one is um, not conscious. And so the caregiver felt as if they had to punish themselves because their loved one was suffering. And sometimes you have to kind of do a self check and a soul check, let's say that, to get your mind and body right and spirit, and say, would my loved one want me to deny myself
Mhm.
of my basic needs, of experiencing joy, of being my best healthy self so that I can take care of them for as long as I am able to?
Yeah. Guys, we have a few more minutes to make sure you get your questions in. And you've mentioned a couple times about the support system, and then I think it was early on in the beginning of the conversation. You also mentioned loneliness. So if you are lonely and you kind of have isolated, I think actually I an interview with Tracy, she talked about that too, where she just literally isolated.
Mhm,
Um, and you just shut off your support system, your friends,
mhm,
everybody.
mhm.
Um, so how important is it to maintain that support system, and how do you maintain it?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, again, like, you want to know the definition of guilt and kind of put it in its place so that it can
Mhm.
have a better meaning. You also want to know how to distinguish between the necessary solitude, because we need moments by ourselves,
Yes.
and the warning signs where it is isolation and withdrawal and it's becoming a red flag. I used to tell my clients or patients, like, don't just know what your red flags are, know what your yellow flags are.
Mhm.
Like, before you get to the point of almost crisis, know what that is. And so if you are alone, that doesn't always have to mean lonely. But if
Right.
you noticing that your time spent by yourself
Mhm.
feels, and becomes isolating and like a situation where it's withdrawal, and maybe you don't have family members, that's where something like personal therapy comes in. That's where something like an in-person or virtual support group comes in. That's where something like reading a good book, if you can't find a therapist that clicks with you, or
Yeah.
going on the internet,
Yeah.
to find a reputable source,
Yes.
where there's some great information about caring for yourself as a caregiver, kicks in. And so recognizing the purpose of your monitoring, like, almost do an experiment with yourself to track
Mhm.
the frequency and the duration of your time alone and the function of it. And then
Mhm.
just do ongoing self assessments to figure out what needs to stay the same and what needs to change.
Okay. Boundaries, because I don't know that we necessarily really touched on that.
Hmm.
There may be moments where family is like, you got to do this, 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 and this, and this, and I don't have time, so you got to do it all.
Hmm.
Where, at what point and how do you set that boundary of like, no, I need help, you
Hmm.
need to help, and if you can't help, then I don't. I don't know the nice way to say it, so just stop it there. But
Yeah,
what are
and
some ways that
sometimes
they
that's
can
the
draw?
struggle, right? Just like
Yeah,
the guilt, right? Maybe you've said it 15 times and they're not listening, so it's less important to be nice.
mhm,
you know,
that part.
you say it in a way that's going to be heard, but also say it through your actions. A lot of times people set boundaries, but they don't adhere to their own boundaries, and that's why people keep pushing and
Yeah.
testing. because the outcome just like a baby, right? Or a toddler,
Hmm.
give me some candy and cry and no, no, no. Okay, just stop crying. Leave me, it's the same
Yeah.
thing, right? If you don't enforce your own boundaries with, other people, they will continue to push. And if you don't recognize that the purpose of the boundary is not necessarily like to shut people out or keep people away, but to protect yourself.
Hmm.
Think about a boundary like a fence, like a guardrail. This is for protection and
Hmm.
this is important. And so it's understanding that you're not responsible for how the other person reacts or responds. If you are in the right mindset to help them figure out an alternative plan, you can do that. But guess what? If you're too exhausted for that, then they'll figure it out. And if they don't, the consequences will, the chips will fall where they may. Now, I'm not talking about the person you're taking care of. I'm
Hmm.
talking to those people where you're taking care of maybe six people and four of them can take care of themselves, but they're just used to you doing certain things.
Right. Right.
I'm not talking about the person you are caring for that has a certain need and dependence because they have a physical, medical, mental, or emotional, need for support. That's very different. And so it's learning how to be comfortable saying no or not now or exploring options. It's releasing yourself from the responsibility of how they're going to respond. Um, and it's recognizing that you're choosing yourself as an act of self love,
Hmm.
and it models for them the importance and the value you feel for yourself and your priorities.
Yeah. So we've got a couple more questions. Shelly wants to know, how do you detach from caregiving trauma after it's done? She said after her mom passed, she dealt with such high anxiety about going to the doctor for herself and was afraid of getting her own exams.
Yeah, anxiety is real after the fact, right? We talked about anticipatory grief, but the trauma, and I've heard that several times before. My loved one is going through so much that I literally have a phobia about going to the doctor because I don't want to know kind of what's going on with me, and it's like
Yeah.
this doom and gloom. The thing that comes to mind is you don't want to ignore those things. You
Mhm.
have to find a way to honor that. Sometimes trauma gets the best of us because we are trying to ignore it. We're
Mhm.
trying to detach from it. But if it's usually best when people try to find a safe space, a safe person. Again, if you don't have the access to that safe person in your life, you can reach out for professional support. Again, a physician, a therapist, a pastor, a priest, spiritual leader, a trusted friend who will hopefully recognize if you need more professional help than,
Mhm.
peer support. And just listen to what the trauma is trying to tell you. And when you're in a better space of mental clarity, again, just like knowing the difference between solitude and withdrawal, you'll know the difference between an ache, a pain, something feeling in your body that is
Mhm.
anxiety versus if it's your own cardiac or blood pressure issues. And you'll, at a minimum, go get it checked out because you don't want to be in a situation where something is made worse because it's been ignored.
Mhm. Let's see. Tamika Smith wanted to know if you could share any websites for first-time caregivers that offer some information and support.
Yes, there are a lot of good ones. Again, whatever condition that your loved one have, you can usually go to like their association, and they usually have a page for caregivers. So, for instance, if you're taking care of somebody with traumatic brain injury, or recovering from a stroke, or a child with special needs, or somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia, if you go to those like national organizations, they usually have a caregiver tab. Some other organizations like AARP, the National Institute of Aging. There's even like a fan. I, if I mess up the name, we can put it in information later, but I think that there's an organization that's called like Family Caregiver Alliance, or like there's another one, caring.org.
Hmm.
There's a lot of different websites out there. I also encourage people to listen to the wisdom of yourself, because what happens is we live in this information age where we want to get the answer from a book or a
Hmm.
podcast or our friend, and sometimes we know what we need to do for ourselves, and we know that we need to get a professional to help us, but it's that fear that's holding us back. So seek out resources for
Hmm.
support and for education and for information, but then be very intentional about what you do with that information in terms of follow up.
Well, that brings me to, I know we're about out of time, but I just had a couple more questions. But what should, a caregiver look for when they are looking for a mental health professional or therapist to help them through this journey? Because, I know it's sometimes like shopping, you've got to keep looking until you find the right
Yeah.
fit. But are there specific things that it should be like, I'm bringing up the checklist again, but is there some kind of like list of things that you need to look for, or is it just kind of the vibe check, like, okay, this resonates with me, that this person um seems to understand where I'm coming from? Or is it, I don't know, it could be anything, I
Yeah,
guess.
it's all of that. It's all of that. And because the topic today is on caregiving, what you want to do is you want to make sure that the professional that you're reaching out to has experience supporting caregivers. And
Mhm.
they may not, I don't know if all of my colleagues would agree with me on this. They may not necessarily have to be an expert in your loved one's medical condition, but they
Mhm.
have to have some kind of experience related to supporting, caregivers and knowing the nuances. And so you also have to be clear on, what do I need support with? Do I need education, right?
Mhm.
Because sometimes you need education and medical advocacy about that specific condition. But if you need, not just, but if you need an accountability partner to make sure that, again, you're taking care of your holistic well-being. So you want to make sure, first and foremost, they're licensed. You want to make sure they have experience being a caregiver. And then you want to work through all the technical things, right? Like, are you using your insurance, and are you doing self pay? Do you have restrictions? Do you know that you want to only see somebody on Saturday morning, or do you want a
Right.
weekday evening, or do you want an early morning before your loved
Mhm.
one gets up, and whatever the case may be? So, do you want virtual or in person? So, sometimes
Mhm.
it's the technical things. But look at it like you are um, shopping, like you're dating, like you're,
Yeah.
because yes, it does take a few times. And also, it is okay to ask those questions in the beginning. Now, some
Mhm.
people just take a leap of faith and go off of a personal referral, or, a profile on a website that they found. But sometimes, a lot of times, people will pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I have some questions. I'm trying to figure out, um, if this is going to be a good fit. You could even start with that one question. Hi, I'm in need of therapy, and I really don't know how to figure out what I need.
Mhm.
How do I know if you're the right fit for me? Kind of, you can, and just,
Yeah.
if in through the engagement and through the response that they give you, you will get that vibe. You mentioned the word vibe. It is.
Mhm.
It is about the personal fit. And sometimes that matters more than how many years they've been practicing, and if they're a doctorate level or a master's level. I
Right.
mean, all of that, it
Mhm.
is very much about personal fit and personality above and beyond credentials and experience. So
Thank
be
you.
comfortable asking the questions. If you don't know the questions to ask,
Mhm.
just ask one, and through the engagement, it will flow. And also, don't be so quick to rule it out. One time I mentioned dating, but maybe that's not the best analogy. If you're the person that like just cut somebody off quick,
I was about
you
to
know,
say, I'm sure I think I did the whole, like, ask questions, and she was crunching in my ear so bad. I was like, you know what? This ain't gonna work. I can't deal with all this chomping in my ear.
yeah. And some, you again, honor your own wisdom, right? Like, when something is a deal breaker for you, or when you're not going to be able to get over something. But
Yeah.
yet, like, you want a therapist that's going to check in and say, like, how is this going for you? Not everybody thinks they want a therapist that is an expert that's going to tell them what to do, but you want somebody to partner with you in this wellness journey because you are the expert of your own life.
Mhm.
You are we see people at best 1 hour a week. You got a whole life going on, and we just
Mhm.
have a snapshot of what's going on. So yes, we have some expertise in our training and in the process of therapy, but you are the expert of your life, and you also have to feel comfortable having that ebb and flow and being able to navigate the conversations just like you do outside of therapy.
Mhm. This has been great. So my last question, because unfortunately we're out of time, but my last question is, what feeds your soul?
What feeds my soul? So definitely the solitude that we talked about.
Mhm.
Spirituality, if you haven't picked that up through some things that I've mentioned related to prayer, and family, loving, caring family members and friends. Lately, I think we were talking earlier,
Mhm.
just to say something silly. I love chai lattes for whatever reason. That just makes me smile. And having some good gelato, or walking around and focusing on my breathing, being in nature, right?
Mhm.
Hearing the wind, feeling the wind. My husband laughs at me because I'm like, "You heard that bird?" And he's like, "You are so corny." I'm like, "Yep." I just, sometimes I'm in this space where it's like,
Yeah.
nature feeds my soul. So different
Mhm.
things feed my soul at different times. But I am blessed to say that my husband and son, feed my soul.
Mhm.
Doing what I love feeds my soul. And music feeds my soul. A lot of things. I'm very grateful.
I love that. Every time someone says, sorry, I don't have good sense. I think my audience knows this by now, but every time now when someone says music, I hear it in Glorilla's voice as music. I'm sorry.
Music, music feeds my soul.
You got to root in the spirit.
I'm silly too, so I mean, humor,
Yeah,
right? Humor
humor.
feeds my soul and gives me life. And you can hold space for both places. You can hold space for anger and grief.
Mhm.
You can hold space for humor and fear and anxiety and despair and all of that.
Yeah.
We don't have to choose. We are multifaceted people, and we just need to find the safe spaces to be our full, authentic self, or to remember how
Mhm.
to get back to that, even when we're taking care of a loved one.
Yeah.
And that's why it is important to tap into these other aspects of wellness, because being a caregiver is a part of who we are. It's not our total identity.
Very true. Dr. Shay, this has been such a great conversation. And thank you to my co-hosts as well. That's what I call them in the chat. Thank you for coming on and talking about caregiver burnout and self-care, because I definitely think it is such an important topic. This was great. For everyone else, for more information on caregiving and preventing burnout, self-care, all the things, make sure you check out all the resources that Dr. Shay mentioned, but also head over to blackdoctor.org, because there's tons of articles over there as well. And I will see you all next week for a celebration. I think it's at 8 o'clock next Wednesday. I'm not sure. You just have to look out for the flyer because I don't remember. We'll be taking a look at seborrheic dermatitis, because I don't know about y'all, but the skin be acting up.
Mhm.
And I don't, and just, yeah, we're going to talk about how to handle that, especially as it's getting colder outside. We're going to talk about how to get it under control and prevent it. So, Dr. Shay and all my co-hosts, I want you all to have a soul-filled rest of the week and find that pocket of joy and gratitude. And yeah, just try to take a moment to breathe.
Absolutely.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you for having me.